Chapter 6 focuses on intercollegiate sport. There are a lot of differences between the NCAA at the Division 1, 2, and 3 level, which we'll cover in the next 3 slides. In terms of Division 1, there are about 335 institutions, 31 conferences, and you need 14 sports to be eligible, 2 of which have to be team sports. There's a heavy emphasis on men's basketball, football, and men's hockey, and the potential to generate revenue, though only less than 1 in 5 programs actually make money, which is different than generating revenue. Full scholarships are available to a number of different athletes in many of the 18 to 24 NCAA sponsored sports. Teams travel extensively, they're often on television quite frequently, and the quality of competition is obviously quite high. Division 2 just went international in this past year and was the first division to have a Canadian team. There are about 290 full or provisional Division 2 members, 24 conferences. At the Division 2 level, you need 10 sports, and again, 2 team sports per gender. There are athletic scholarships at the Division 2 level, although a lot of athletes play without athletic scholarships due to funding at the institution. There are still pretty high time commitments for student athletes and extensive travel as well. And last but not least is the Division 3 level, which is actually the largest of all 3 divisions with about 450 members. 80% of the schools at the Division 3 level are private. You need 10 sports to be eligible, and it's much more regionally based competition and a lot less commercial exposure and sponsorship and marketing at the Division 3 level than at the Division 1 or 2 level, and there are no athletic scholarships at the Division 3 level. And continuing to examine the likelihood that people will move on to the next level, here's a slide that has percentages of the chance that you'll make it from an NCAA athlete to a professional athlete. Again, overwhelmingly, the odds are not in your favor. There's a 90% chance that the majority of these athletes will not actually make it to the professional level. There's a lot of money invested and involved in collegiate sport these days. Billions of dollars being paid for television contracts, billions of dollars and millions of dollars in terms of budgets for athletic departments, and licensing fees and merchandising, as well as selling naming rights to stadiums. This infographic illustrates the highest paid state employees in each of the 50 states. Again, where's the money going? Primarily to football and men's basketball coaches and not to college presidents or faculty members. So the emphasis at these institutions nationwide is on sport. There are a number of different contradictions of big-time collegiate sports. One is that there's a lot more money given to student athletes, and there are a couple charts, slides that have charts and figures on them that'll illustrate that. There are a lot of demands on student athletes from film sessions, practice sessions, lifting that takes a lot of time and travel away from them for actually being a student. They spend, even though they're only supposed to spend about 20 hours a week, they spend like a full-time job well over 40 hours a week just being an athlete and not being a student. In addition, which we'll get into further a little bit later, is that colleges often enroll unprepared students who are not ready for academic coursework at the college level, which creates a whole series of problems. Furthermore, collegiate coaches often engage in unethical behavior, like Bobby Petrino, who is pictured here, was married, had a mistress, and his mistress was on his staff. So the state institution was paying this woman to be part of the football staff, and we can use air quotes around that. Most programs lose money, so we pour billions of dollars and millions of dollars into these programs, yet they may generate revenue, but they don't actually make a profit. And student athletes do not get paid. So athletes can perform on the field, be seen on TV. If people buy their jerseys, come to watch them play, they generate a lot of revenue for the institution, but they're not compensated for that. The hidden secret of this is that athletic departments often rely on student fees and university budgets to subsidize, which means make up the difference between their expenses and revenues. Smaller institutions who generate less revenue have large issues, and American colleges have used more than $2 billion in student fees to subsidize athletics. So basically, in student fees, part of that goes to paying for athletes' travel, equipment, and things of the like. This graph also exemplifies the amount of money being spent on student athletes compared to non-student athletes. $90,000 per year spent on FBS athletic spending per athlete compared to $1,600 being spent on non-student athletes at the same institution. So those student fees are being put towards that $90,000 per student athlete. And what does the non-student athlete get back for it? Well, they get back maybe a good time by going to the games, but beyond that, it's hard to argue that they get much more concrete things back from their investment. The NCAA loves the concept of amateurism, so they prohibit anything they deem professional, and this can range from endorsing products, getting actually paid for their athletic skill, selling complimentary tickets, merchandise, or autographs. So if athletes violate these rules, they lose eligibility. Their teams, therefore, may actually lose games. In addition, athletes often have restricted mobility. So once you sign a national letter of intent, you're bound to the institution that you signed that letter to. So if you want to transfer, you can transfer institutions, but you may not be able to play or be athletically eligible. So if coaches leave, or if a coach comes in and doesn't want to let you leave, they can hold you to that and you can transfer, but you may not be able to play anymore. In speaking to the academic unpreparedness, athletes have often been special admits, meaning they wouldn't have gotten into the institution otherwise if they weren't an athlete. And these 2 points that relate to SAT scores kind of illustrate that they're coming in with lower grades, lower SAT scores in comparison to non-student athletes. And this tweet from Cardell Jones was priceless. Basically, he's saying, I didn't come here to go to school, I came here to play football, and that's what I need to focus on. Furthermore, athletes have also been overrepresented in certain majors that are seen as easier or friendlier, like at certain institutions. At University of North Carolina, it was the African and Africana Studies department, in which they had this major academic fraud scandal that was going on for about 15 years, where athletes were taking classes in which they didn't have to turn anything in, or they turned in a paragraph and they got A's. And there wasn't even a professor on campus. He was out of the country and he was supposed to be teaching these students in North Carolina. In terms of the graduation success rate for all female athletes, it's pretty high, meaning that they start and graduate within 6 years, 86%. The male athlete GSR is 73%, but if you look at certain sports like men's basketball and football, due to those athletes leaving early, transferring, or just not being eligible, it gets a lot worse, and those grades are a lot lower. So academic achievement varies, and there are some underlying issues related to that, as I just discussed. Sociologists argue that there are a few issues related to athletic departments having a commercial orientation versus an academic orientation. The first is that since few athletic departments actually make money and generate revenue, it leads to making decisions about which programs can stay and which programs get cut. And a lot of men's programs have bear the brunt of that. So like men's wrestling, men's swimming and diving, men's soccer programs have been cut because athletic departments refuse to take money away from men's basketball, football, and men's hockey. In addition, universities prostitute themselves, meaning they'll do anything to get a sponsorship. They'll go play games in which they get hammered by 100 points just because that other institution paid them to go there so that they can fund their athletic department through that payment. Along the same lines, games have been scheduled to suit television contracts, so you've got teams playing across the country midweek and they miss 2 to 3 to 4 days of class, so the impact on that student athlete's academic performance may be pretty significant. And all of this commercial orientation leads to the heavy emphasis on winning, which then may lead coaches to cheat. So having academic advisors take exams, write papers, having boosters pay student athletes to go to your institution are all violations of NCAA rules and result from this heavy emphasis on revenue generation. There are several suggested reforms to try to eliminate some of these issues. The first is to put the athletic department under the control of presidents, so they're not their own separate entity anymore, so they're under the academic framework and they actually have to integrate into the institution. To curb outside income for coaches, so a lot of coaches have shoe deals, they've got radio contracts, they've got these other things in which on top of the $1 to $2 to $5 million a year, they're generating all this other revenue that again increases that pressure to win. Because if you're not winning, you're going to lose those contracts. Another idea is to make freshmen ineligible so that they have to focus on academics and they can't just go to the pros right away. So you're getting them into this institution, they're getting acclimated to the culture, and they're ideally learning something and on the way to graduate. And the fourth piece is an athlete bill of rights, which states that which would state or give athletes some recourse to those issues that I talked about in terms of transferring, in terms of the way they're treated by as a commodity by coaches, and giving them some actual recourse to be able to deal with when they're treated poorly. The chapter outlined a number of different ways or problems in intercollegiate sport. The first is the NCAA's monopoly on student athletes' rights and the ways in which it restricts their freedoms, from transferring and being eligible to not allowing them to make money off of their likeness, autographs, merchandise. In addition, unethical behavior of coaches due to the emphasis on revenue generation and winning, as well as enrolling academically unprepared student athletes and then putting them in majors that don't help them graduate and don't help them get jobs once they graduate.